Hello, and welcome to this presentation on intercultural awareness and communication. My name is Jen Crystal, and I'm the Assistant Director in the Center for Global Education at Marymount. Today's presentation is presented as part of the I Lead Leadership Series, and today we're hoping to give you a little bit more information on culture and how to effectively communicate across culture. Today we will consider three questions. First, what are the qualities of a good leader? Second, what role does intercultural awareness play in leadership? And lastly, how do you become a better leader and build future leaders within your organization? So let's start off by asking ourselves, what is culture? Culture can be an elusive term with many different definitions. However, one of the best ways to think about culture is in terms of an iceberg. So as you can see by the image on the right, there are two different types of culture. The first type of culture that we can think about is called surface culture. These include things that we can see, touch, and feel, such as food, fashion, language, and literature. All of these things are considered above the surface because we can see and observe them. However, there are various elements of culture that lie below the surface or below the water, and these elements of culture are referred to as deep culture. These include people's sense of time, views of authority, and notions of friendship and leadership. So when we think about culture, we want to constantly be thinking about our own cultural lens, and then also try to be aware that others are looking through their own cultural lens as well. So in different leadership positions at Marymount, you want to constantly be aware that your members or other students are going to be coming with different cultural lenses. So for instance, if someone is late to a meeting, you may want to think about how their culture is influencing their sense of time. So their being late may not necessarily be a sign of laziness or a sign of poor time management skills. However, they may just have a different cultural sense of time than you do. The same may go for a view of authority. So if you have a quiet student in your group, that may not necessarily mean that they have nothing to say or that they have nothing to contribute. However, their view of authority is probably different than yours, and it may be more uncomfortable for them to speak up. So now that we know a little bit more about culture, both surface culture and deep culture, let's move on and think about what do we mean when we say intercultural awareness and intercultural development. This model here is a model of intercultural development continuum, and it's been developed by Dr. Mitch Hamner of the IDI. So with this model, you can see that there are 5 primary stages of intercultural development, and they're moving from a monocultural mindset to an intercultural mindset. So on the next slide, I'll detail what each of these stages mean. So in the first stage of intercultural competence, a lot of people find themselves in denial. In this stage, one might say, well, my cultural experience is the only one that is real and valid. There's little to no thought of other people's points of view or other people's cultural lenses. So in this stage, people are really in denial about cultural differences. The next stage is called defense, and this is where people might think that we are superior to them and their point of view is inferior to ours. So this is a really sort of polarizing way to think about culture, and it's a very us versus them mentality. In the next stage of cultural awareness, you have minimization. In this stage, you recognize cultural difference, however, you tend to minimize those differences. So other cultures are traditionally trivialized or romanticized, and one tends to deny differences. So they might say, oh, I'm colorblind, or we're all equal. So they really seek the similarities rather than honing in on some of the cultural differences. In the next stage of acceptance, this is where you identify and recognize cultural differences and you're curious and respectful, so you accept the difference. However, you can take that a step further in a stage called adaptation. So this is where you not only accept cultural differences, but you begin to see the world through different eyes and make intentional changes in your own behavior and values to adapt to certain cultural settings. And last but not least, the stage of integration. So this is where you can easily weave in and out of different cultural worldviews. And this stage is very advanced and quite difficult to get to. And oftentimes people have to live abroad for many, many years in order to reach this stage of integration. Okay, so now that we know a little bit more about culture and intercultural competence, let's think about how we can effectively communicate across different cultures. In the next slide, I have a short video that we're going to watch.
It's a big world, full of difference and diversity. How you see others is influenced by your own cultural perspective, and how others see you is influenced by their cultural perspective. What happens when you speak? Do people from other cultures understand you in the way you intended? And what happens with different cultures in the workplace? How rigid or flexible is their approach to rules? Is formal or informal behavior expected? And how do different cultures approach timekeeping? In today's global business environment, it is essential to learn how to navigate across different cultural landscapes. You need a good set of tools to do this. You need an understanding of how different cultures trade and do business, an insight into how different cultures communicate, and a clear idea of how different cultures manage people. To be a savvy global traveler, you need to be willing to undertake the journey of understanding other cultures. Develop cultural intelligence so you can communicate confidently across cultures.
Okay, so as we can see from this short video, intercultural communication is really key to every aspect of life, not only your academic endeavors currently, but it will extend into your professional career as well. So on this slide here, we have some practical tips for intercultural communication. So the first one is to do your homework. Research is key, and we need to be aware of cultural norms and standards. So it's helpful to think back to the iceberg and to always remember those elements of culture that we can't typically see, hear, or touch. All of those elements of deep culture that lie beneath the surface. The second bullet point is listen. Effective communication and leadership begins with active listening and observation. And last but not least, reflection. So continual reflection on your own cultural lens and then also reflecting on the culture of others is incredibly important when you're thinking about intercultural communication. It's important to remember that some communication is also unspoken. So on this slide here, we have a continuum representing low context cultures versus high context cultures. High context cultures value indirect and implicit messages in their communication. They rely on a high use of nonverbal communication, such as facial expressions, hand gestures, etc. In high context cultures, relationships are far more important than the schedules or the tasks at hand. In addition, they also use intuition and feelings to make decisions. So examples of high context cultures or countries would be Mexico, Japan, or the Middle East. On the other hand, in low context cultures, there's a value placed on direct, simple, and clear communication. In these types of cultures, there's a low use of nonverbal communication, meaning that facial expressions, hand gestures, etc., are not used as frequently or valued. In these low context cultures, schedules or tasks at hand are far more important than actual relationship building between individuals. And finally, in contrast to high context cultures, low context cultures really rely on facts and evidence as opposed to intuition and feelings when making decisions. Examples of countries that would represent low context cultures would include Germany, Switzerland, and the United States. So in the United States, this is the type of communication that we might be more familiar with, that very direct, simple, and clear communication with a low reliance on nonverbal communication. So now that we know a little bit more about culture and intercultural communication, let's think back and reflect on what this all has to do with being a good leader. So this quote here reminds us that leadership is about empathy. It is about having the ability to relate to and connect with people for the purposes of inspiring and empowering their lives. So I like this quote personally because it talks about empathy. And when we think about empathy, empathy is the ability to relate to other people, to really see through their cultural lens and be able to kind of walk in their shoes for a moment. So leadership is definitely about listening to others, seeking to understand them, and to really value and validate the cultural lens that they're looking through. So now let's think about how we can translate this knowledge into action. So many of you probably have heard of IQ, which is a measure of intelligence. Here we can think about cultural intelligence, or CQ. And this is the ability to function effectively in culturally diverse settings. But it's not just enough to be knowledgeable or to be aware of cultural differences. We have to take that knowledge and really translate it into strategy, and then later translate that into action and drive. So it's great to be aware of cultural differences, but we really want to be actively reflecting on how we can strategically put some of this knowledge into action in our daily lives. So on this slide, we have some practical tips for putting some of this knowledge into action. So when you're thinking about your leadership role on campus, you can start to think about creating spaces that really facilitate intercultural knowledge and communication. So for instance, thinking back to the example of the quiet student who might be in your group and thinking about their cultural lens and the values they might put on authority and things like that. So in order to create an intercultural space there, you could actually implement a strategy for collecting questions or comments via sticky notes or an anonymous form of some sort. This definitely helps to create an intercultural space and validates different cultures and how they might view authority. Next, you can also teach your members about intercultural awareness and communication. So for example, if you're a community assistant, you could have an activity for your floor or your hall around intercultural communication. And if you need any ideas, you can certainly come to the Center for Global Education. We're happy to present to your group or to provide you with the tools to help you give a presentation to your group. And lastly, we would encourage you to think about, again, open communication and encouraging that intercultural dialogue, and then looking back on your goals as a leader or as an organization and revising those goals and incorporating some of the elements of intercultural knowledge and awareness that we've talked about today. Last but not least, I'll leave you with this final thought. How will you be a better global leader? So we certainly hope that you've learned some tips and ideas for how to do that and how to translate that knowledge into action. I thank you for your attention today, and if you do have any questions or you want any more information, please feel free to contact me via email at jcrystal@marymount.edu. And finally, if you are doing this for the I Lead Leadership Series, please don't forget to fill out this quick evaluation to receive credit for your attendance at today's presentation.